So, good morning, everyone. Good morning to the panelists. Good morning to the Director General of CAPS, Deputy Director General, distinguished audience. I have been asked to speak on regional alliances, challenges, and opportunities, and I'll try to stick to the time limit of 7-8 minutes. So, what I will do is just throw up some ideas and thoughts in the hope that this by itself will provide the answers to the question that has been raised. My first point is that nomenclature, or rather words, actually are extremely important. In other words, the topic is regional alliances. The question which we should ask ourselves honestly is, what do we understand by the term alliances? When I was looking at the various kinds of multilateral arrangements that we have and existed in the past, I came across a variety of terminologies, and I'll just read them out to you so that you would appreciate that using the right word is not just good English, but it also has a deep strategic meaning behind it. For example, you have, of course, alliances, you have association, you have partnerships, you have corridors, you have symposiums, you have conclaves, you have commissions, you have organizations, you have even a community of democracies, and otherwise you may have no word, like Russia, India, China. There's nothing after China. So each of these words, each of these terms suggests that the members of this entity have spent a long time deciding how to describe what they have created. So what is the difference, and why should a group decide to call themselves an alliance, and why should someone else decide to call themselves an association, like the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation? Or why should someone use the term conclave, like the Colombo Security Conclave, and not the Colombo Security Association or the Colombo Security Alliance? Why should we call it the Indian Ocean Commission and not the Indian Ocean Association? But on the other hand, you have the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. And then you have, as I mentioned to you, organization. Why do you have the Indian Ocean Regional Organization for Regional Cooperation? So the suggestion here is that alliances, we need to understand their genesis and their purpose. So I'll leave that thought with you. Of course, the mother of all, if I can usually use the word alliances, was the North versus the South, or the East versus the West. But things have moved on, and we have now, as I have indicated, a whole variety of different arrangements. Second point which I want to throw up to you is, what are the drivers of these arrangements? Is it the case that it's only the weak who seek to form alliances? Historically, that doesn't really measure up to validation. For example, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, despite US supremacy in the world, chose to actually create a coalition of countries which was a military alliance. And of course, that was matched by the Warsaw Treaty Organization, centered in Moscow and the former communist countries. So here we have the two most powerful military blocs in the world at that time, who, despite their supremacy and individual capabilities, nevertheless chose to form alliances. So it is the weak and the strong who find a reason and a necessity for entering into arrangements with other countries. Third point is, the aims and objectives of these arrangements, they vary. Sometimes the aims and objectives are overt in the sense that they are stated, but most of the time the aims and objectives are unspoken or stated differently between what the actual goal is and what the intended or the underlying strategic goal is. So therefore, this is obfuscation, strategic obfuscation, where you may have, for example, something like, let us say, the coalition, let us say the International Solar Alliance or the Coalition for Disaster Resilience Infrastructure. So this is a coalition, that's the alliance. Or you may have the Global Biofuel Alliance, or you may have IMEC, which is a corridor. Now the interesting thing about all these is that yes, these are meant to promote solar energy, these are meant to promote disaster, these are meant to promote the use of biofuels, but that's not the interesting story about them. The interesting story is who's inside them. And that is one thing which we need to also keep in mind. So I talked about the weak and the strong. I would also like to talk about the relationship between the bilateral and the multilateral. It is the case that the success of any regional arrangement rests a lot on the nature of bilateral relationships, say in the Quad between India and the US, India and Australia, India and Japan, or India and Australia. So the bilateral relationships determine the success of a regional or an arrangement or a multilateral arrangement. In the BRICS, say for example, India's relations with China, Russia, South Africa, etc. determine the success of BRICS. But on the other hand, it is equally true that many times countries use multilateral arrangements to promote bilateral ties. So when you have the Russia, India, China, and there's no word after that, by the way, it's just called the Russia, India, China group, is used by members differently for different purposes. Russia uses the RIC to help mediate between India and China. China uses the RIC to project it as India being on the side of the Russians and the Chinese in the war against the West. So the interlinkage between the bilateral relationship affecting the success of the multilateral and the multilateral being used to impact and influence the bilateral are organic and dynamic characteristics. I would only just make refer to a few examples of success or a few examples of regional or other arrangements, which would be maybe the best way to case study what we are trying to talk about. So the case study method to understand why some alliances have succeeded and then draw lessons from them. So obviously the new game in town is AUKUS and Quad and Indo-Pacific and IMEC, and these are recent, last few years, generating a lot of excitement in the strategic community, as if this is our solution to China. But on the other hand, and we can discuss each of them, my own view is that each of them is a highly complex arrangement with multiple different objectives of individual members. Success is not guaranteed, but it does provide us varying degrees of strategic comfort. But let's look at why some have not succeeded. Let's start with SAARC. The South Asian Association was one of the first alliances which we established, and it has not succeeded for the simple reason that one member decided to sabotage it. The question is, therefore, why did BBIN succeed, the Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal construct? That succeeded because we removed the bad egg in this alliance, and so that we decided to move fast forward without an impediment to regional cooperation. For example, today, when you look at the ASEAN and its policy in Myanmar, which we discussed yesterday, it's under severe threat. The so-called ASEAN unity on regional issues is under threat because of the complexity of the situation in Myanmar, and different ASEAN countries are taking different positions. INSTC, the North-South Transport Corridor, is 20 years old, but it hasn't moved. And that's because there was political will, there is logic, there is geographically there is a very compelling case, but it hasn't moved for very different reasons, which have external reasons for its lack of success. If you look at, say, for example, BRICS and SCO, there's a lot of discussion today whether BRICS is a success or a failure. What is the objective of BRICS? Is it an anti-West construct? Is it being used by China? Is it being used by Russia? So here the other question which arises and we must consider and ask ourselves is, in any organization, are you a junior partner? Are you like the follower? Are you like the pioneer? Are you like the leader? Or are you an equal partner? And these also then shape what your country's role will be in such organizations. So what we have done, for example, in these few institutions that we have set up, like the Solar Alliance or the disaster or the biofuel or the I2U2, etc., is that the common thread in all these is that India has taken the initiative to establish. And so if you're the first mover, you come with a prepared agenda to the meeting. I mean, figuratively speaking, when you begin to create this structure, you have something in your mind. And you say, okay, I will play to my strengths. So these are some of the points I will only illustrate. For example, among the more recent ones, I would also refer to the Colombo Security Conclave. I mean, it's headquartered in Colombo. It has 4 or 5 members. It has attracted the attention of the Chinese. Now, it is a very ambitious, very bold plan. So, but we have to ask ourselves who initiated, whose idea it was, and what is the strategic objective. So, but on the other hand, you have BIMSTEC, which was supposed to be the answer to SARC as an alternative. But we all remember how Nepal refused to participate in the military exercises as part of the BIMSTEC military exercises. They said we will not do it. So there are opportunities everywhere, but there are also challenges. But let me conclude by just saying that as we go ahead, we should be more proactive in building and creating such structures rather than just being drawn into or being invited or becoming some kind of a passive participant in these structures. We should be more proactive and we should be prepared for failure. We should also be much more flexible. If something doesn't work, you create something else. Don't get fixed or fixated on any one particular grouping. This is a dynamic situation, and as I said, words matter. The Americans had long time ago started this whole business of community of democracies. India never became a part of it. But what was the strategic objective of this community of democracies? They recently, last year, talked about the world being divided between democracies and autocracies. We never subscribed to that division of the world. So, in the future, as I see it, the Indian mind, the Indian strategic identity is going to and should more and more influence the kind of sub-regional, regional and global coalitions that we make. So I'll just stop here. I hope this gives a little flavor of the complexities and the challenges and opportunities. Thank you.